What's up, Bookworms? This is Megan coming at you with another Cantina conversation. Today's episode features a chat with Rosa Kwon Easton. We're talking about her book, White Mulberry. That book is available now. Very exciting. Rosa is a debut author. This was her first novel, and it was really cool. I really enjoyed talking to her about the challenges that her family, her ancestors went through in their lives, just emigrating and during the Japanese Korea occupation, all that happened leading up to World War II. And it was really cool to hear about how her own family's history influenced this book and her character's journey. But without further ado, here is Rosa. So today we've got Rosa Kwon Easton. We're talking about her book, White Mulberry. That book is available on December 1st. Rosa, thank you so much for joining me today. Just finished the book yesterday. It was so enjoyable. You tugged at the heartstrings, and I appreciate just the storytelling in your writing style because, like with historical fiction, it could be a little tricky, but I was happy to have the opportunity, and I really enjoyed getting to know your characters and all that good stuff. Yeah, I'm happy to dig in today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled. And I had the opportunity to listen to a few of your podcasts, and you have such an amazing interview voice. And so when I heard it just now, I was like, oh, this is awesome.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you listening, and yeah, you're thank you for the compliment. I tell people because sometimes authors get nervous, and I'm
Yes.
like, "I'm just a big dork. I'm gonna ramble about your work, and there's no worries. It's totally informal, and, like, I'm focused on quality over quantity."
Yes, no, I appreciate that. And it's wonderful that you do this work to amplify writers. And I'm a debut novelist. And so
Yeah,
this is all new to me.
yeah.
And it's my second career. I just turned 60 this year. So I'm hitting
Congratulations.
a bunch of milestones in the same year. It's almost like I waited my whole life and then everything is happening at one time.
Yeah. You're just, like, relaxing for a few decades, just like
Yes, relaxing for many decades. Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then now you're like, "Okay, time to be a boss. Time to get this show on the road." Well, yeah, congrats on your debut and congrats on, turning 60. That's a big deal. But, yeah, going off of that, would you? Because I wanna go into, like, your background. First,
Yes.
before I get ahead of myself, could you give a summary of the book so that people can follow along with the conversation?
Yeah, yeah. So my book is a historical novel. It is actually based on my grandmother's story, and it's about a Korean girl growing up in 1930s Japan. And she is conflicted between two identities because she's Korean living in Japan, and she passes as Japanese to survive during a harsh colonization period. She finds her calling as a nurse, has a son, but then is drafted to serve in the Japanese army and during World War II. And she has to decide whether to comply or whether to defy the order and claim life on her own terms.
Yeah, in a nutshell, it's so much heavier than that with the decisions she has to make and her loneliness and the inner turmoil and conflict and just the loss and the heartbreak and the tricky situations that are out of her control, and it's what the whole what we'll get into it. Can you I wanna piggyback off your comment earlier about this kinda like your second job or job number 2. Can you go into, like, your background and maybe know what led you to, bring out White Mulberry into the world
Yeah.
and, like, all of it?
I am a lawyer by profession, but I stopped practicing 25 years ago
Okay.
when my daughter was born, and it's actually her 25th birthday tomorrow.
Oh, wow.
And some of the themes I touch on in my novel, but motherhood is very complicated. And having a second child and having a very demanding job, it just required me to prioritize what I thought was important at the time in my life.
Mhm.
Uh, but I've always been interested in books, and I'm currently a library trustee as well. So I was able to use my legal skills in a lot of different arenas, volunteer work. And as a library trustee, we make sure that the library is making ends meet with through
Mhm.
it has adequate policies and procedures to deal with anything that comes up, but mostly just stewarding the mission and vision of a public library, which is to allow free and equitable access to everyone who visits. And I was a beneficiary of that because coming here to the United States when I was 7 from South Korea, I had to go to the library to learn how to speak English, to read
Yeah.
English, to figure out, like, what is this society all about? I can find out about it through books, Little House on the Prairie and Judy Blume and Beverly Cleary. This has got to be my life from now on.
Yeah.
These are the characters I need to be, and I never found a lot of characters who looked like me and who felt like, and
Mhm.
so I think in the back of my mind, I always sought that out and wanted that for my children and for the younger generation who didn't see themselves in stories. And so I think it was a gradual, decades long process. But the trigger was really, I found some documents on my father's desk, and they were old nursing and midwife certificates, and they were written in Japanese. And I asked my father about them, like, these are grandma's certificates. Why are they in Japanese? And I knew he was born in Japan, but we're ethnically Korean. So I
Mhm.
just started down the path of, what are these? Why do you have them? And why was she in Japan during that time? So it just came from curiosity and wanting to learn more about my past.
Yeah, I think I was reading that in, like, your author's note, at the end, and I'm like, "Oh my god, that's so fascinating that Miyang or Miyoko, will use the name interchangeably,
Yes.
that's based on your own family history." I think that's so amazing and fascinating, and I thought, "Oh, man, how cool was it for you to discover that?" And you at that, even at a certain age, your worldview is still, like, expanding. That's so crazy.
Yes, the more the years go by, the more experience you gain, the more to the past you go. It's your future is more limited, your past is longer.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I wanted to preserve those stories for future generations, for my own children, so that they wouldn't get lost. And I wanted young people to recognize that their stories are valid. And so this is really, I think I somehow wrote a coming of age story of sorts.
Mm,
And I didn't know I was doing that. I don't think authors know exactly what they're doing when they set out to write a story, because this was originally a memoir. It was a family memoir,
mm.
and I switched gears in the middle of it and turned it into fiction.
Yeah, that's so cool that you decided, "You know what? This story, it w it like, you decided how best to tell it." Right, and I'm sure it could be just as and fascinating as a memoir, but I could see, like, where you switched it to, like, the creative route.
I didn't think that I could really delve into character motivations and their
Mm,
conflicts and things that I always love seeing in stories and that make stories compelling to me, because I was really talking about someone else's life.
yeah,
And that's fine if you're writing a biography and you're like focused on the facts and what happened. But this, I wanted to be more of a poignant story, and one that was more heartfelt, I think,
yeah.
than a nonfiction could be, perhaps.
100%, 'cause I think, with memoirs, you never know what you're gonna get, and it definitely the delivery is so important. Because there's memoirs where I've read, I'm like, "No, like, what they went through, that it was compelling," but there were also memoirs where I'm like, "Oh my god," like, I was engaged
Yeah,
in figuring out how it was gonna turn out for them, or
right.
already know what's gonna happen. It's like the journey along the way. Because like, even with yours, it's people who are familiar with Japanese and, like, Korean occupation, and how they became involved, rose to the force that they were by the time they entered World War II. Like, people who are familiar with that, it's not spoilery for them, they understand, and then you're telling one girl's story versus someone like me. I was just like, I joke around, I like it when I feel a little bit smarter when I'm finished reading the book, so I like.
Well, I hope it educates a little bit, but through the eyes of a particular individual living at that place and time. And I
Mhm.
think because it's based on a true story, but I think that it's a universal story of growing up as an outsider. And I
Oh,
certainly
yeah.
felt that and felt like I could bring that part of my experience growing up as an immigrant in the US into this story. I was able to make my way into it because I had the lens from which to view her world as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then so this was your grandmother's, but you weren't able to speak with her about this at all. You were only able to speak and then you had to ask your dad to translate it?
Yeah, I do speak Kitchen or Korean or first grade Korean or whatever, because
Okay.
I did here when I was in first grade, and I took
Okay.
language classes in college and things, but her story was so, complex. It's hard to
Mm,
understand all the nuances and exactly what she was talking about. So I did a couple of extensive interviews with her that I recorded. But when I got down to translating and trying to understand, my dad sat in with me and explained things along the way. But I also had to do a lot of research and figure out what exactly was happening during that time to understand the complete scope of what she was talking about. So it was
oh,
a
I see.
multi-generational inquiry in some ways. It was wonderful to have my dad sit in on it and to have my grandmother tell it. And she really was not happy about
Mm,
herself. And my agent, when I was telling her about this part, and she said, of course she didn't want to talk about it. Her secrets kept her alive. Why would she want to reveal her secrets now?
yeah,
She was 80 at the time, I think, when I interviewed her, and she was just like, why would anybody care? And why is this important? And she still wanted to
mm,
protect, I think, her herself and the way others maybe saw her. And she was always a strong woman. I mean, she had a career. She had a career at 30. I barely had a
mm,
career, even though I studied
yeah,
to be a lawyer.
yep.
But she used those skills to survive, to make a life for herself, to ironically put her into this pickle where she was not a pickle, but a dire life and death situation where she was being recruited to serve as a nurse for the Japanese. And I think she had this moment where, wait, why am I serving in another country's war? And if I go, there's no guarantee that I'm going to return.
Yeah.
And so I think part of it was because she had her career and she had a skill, she had the courage to take these daring steps to escape with her son.
Yeah, yeah, I how crazy is that, like, skill and education gives you that last little bit of fire that you need to, like, because who knows where she would have ended up, where your family would have ended up if she didn't acquire, like, some sort of trade that could help make her valuable,
Right.
her a chance to just to transfer those skills, like, elsewhere, that where she could survive elsewhere,
Yeah.
and it's a bunch of interesting points that you bring up, absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. The education, as from the beginning part of the book, was the idea that girls and women could be educated came from the missionaries who
Mhm.
American Presbyterian missionaries who were prevalent in North Korea, the Pyongyang area, what is now the Pyongyang area where she grew up. And if it wasn't for their belief or idea that girls could have an education, I don't think she would have traveled the path that she traveled over the course of her life. And her mother understood essentially, I think that's what her daughters needed. And it was sad that she sent all her daughters away. So
Mm.
because she knew that the future for them in Korea was not bright.
Yeah, because I saw that reflected in Myung's mother. I thought it was interesting because she was very much like of her getting an education and she was like praising it and Myung was like, "Wait, what?" Like I was not expecting these words at all.
Oh,
These compliments like my mom thinks about me
yeah,
and verbalizes them and
right.
but then and then on the other hand, she's like was so against the Western religion. Right, that's the gist I got. So I thought that was, like, an interesting, like, point of view. It's a little bit multidimensional, right? Like, a little bit
Yeah.
on complicated.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think characters are complicated that way, and even mothers or women during that era were set in their ways. But I think the idea that her daughters could have a chance somewhere else, and if it was
Yeah.
through education, she would give her daughters up for that. And it
Mm.
wasn't purely for education. I think it was also for economic reasons because they lived in a
Mhm.
poor rural village. It wasn't, and her her husband slash father of her children, he was quick to marry her off, and that was sort of
Yeah.
the turning point. Her fate was to stay in the village and marry this guy who was a bully, or she could follow her sister and maybe have a different kind of life somewhere else. And I think at that time she also knew she was very sick and
Mm,
she couldn't protect her much longer. And so these young girls were sent off to different countries before the age of puberty in some ways. It was a sad time. You make the best of the resources that you have, and she didn't have
yeah.
any. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Because yeah, I wanna piggyback off of your research aspect
Yeah.
because I'm curious, was there anything that, like, you were most surprised or, like, the most fascinating thing that you learned? And not just talking with
Yeah.
your family, but getting clarification elsewhere, stuff like that.
Yeah, yes. I had a hard time finding primary resources of Koreans living in Korea in rural villages,
Mm,
like in the 1920s and 30s, because the women were certainly not writing about their lives, and
yeah,
they were surviving. But
yeah.
I did come across this series called Woman's Work, and it was published by the Presbyterian Missionary Women's Organization. And they traveled across the world and they documented like domestic practices,
Wow.
not the heathens, but people who lived in those countries. And I remember one of the entries was, these women, they carry their babies strapped to their backs and they feed them like whenever they want to be fed, like they feed them on demand. And they just thought like that was so different than the western way of taking care of babies. And so I learned a lot about daily life and like what women were doing at the time, and I also read a lot of social history. So history not centered on the politics and economics of what was
Yeah,
going on, but what was happening in the everyday lives of people through diaries, through firsthand experience.
yeah.
And those were hard to find for sure. And so there were a few memoirs written during that time, written by men, and some fictionalized stories of Koreans living in Japan during the colonial period and the constant conflict they faced because they were ostracized and discriminated against by the Japanese population as a whole.
Yeah, oh, man.
Yeah.
That's so crazy 'cause I feel like I could listen to every little thing you just like, you little details that you have. It's so fascinating. That's so crazy that thankfully for that group that decided to do that research on the social history and the customs and stuff because
Yeah.
there could be so many fascinating details to learn, but nobody's asking the questions or nobody's making the effort, and I bet that was just like a gold mine for you. You were like, "Oh my god," like
No, it truly was. And those were always the stories that I enjoyed reading in history classes. Like, what happened to the people?
Yeah. It's so much different now because like, everything's so documented. People do we all
Social
document our
media,
own every day,
now.
and it's really funny because 'cause I'm thinking like, "Man, in 20 years, we're just gonna continue laughing at ourselves," like, I even like going back, look at what today like, what's trending and stuff like that, and humans are amazing, but we're also, like, so like, stupid and simple and just hilarious, and it's just but it also, like, reflects on what you also wanna proceed with caution, right? Because, like, technology is just making it yes, it's great that everybody has a voice, but then it's okay, not everybody has a voice. And so you just there's 2 sides to that coin. And I think that no, I just think it's fantastic that there was some way somebody found a way to document that, even however long it took. Because exactly like how you said, like when I think about my education, like my formal education learning history, yeah, it's very like factual
Right,
and informative.
right,
And you don't necessarily get like the psyche of the human condition or the context of one person's we're all brave in the same storm, but one person's boat is not the same as another person's boat. Like
right,
a family very well off is experiencing something much different than a different family who is from a lower socioeconomic class or doesn't have the connections or the network or resources that another family or another group of people might have. So yeah, you're absolutely right that it's just that's that I would is arguably more interesting to learn about.
The interesting thing about what you just said, though, is that the wars are the great equalizer, though. What happened in World War II and what obviously the occupation in 1910, there was a royal class, there was the royalty, there was the Yangbang class, they call it, which were the scholars and the landowners who were very well off. They were privileged, but
Yeah.
with the colonization, everybody's lives became subsumed under the Japanese. The people who collaborated with the Japanese were able to keep some of their wealth, but
Mm,
the ones
mm,
who were resisted Japanese control lost everything. And that's exactly how the love interest in the story, which is based on my grandfather, Ho Jun in the book, his family came over because the great grandfather had lost all his land to
yeah.
the Japanese. And so just we came over as immigrants from Korea in the 1970s for greater economic opportunity in America. They went from Korea to Japan for the same. But what they faced there was in some ways much harsher because they had the additional level of being isolated, not in their homeland, the country where they were born. And there was always a longing, I think, to return, or they were, I'm going to go back home one day. And
Yeah.
war's over, I'm going to go back home. But it was the World War II ended, everyone went back home, but the country was destroyed. Then the Korean War happened. And so it's a miracle that the Korean wave is happening right now. And
Yeah.
Han Gong just won the Nobel Prize for Literature, and she's a South Korean
Mm,
author. And countries can transform after a difficult and turbulent experience, but the people suffer. And the people in the diaspora, my family didn't come until the 1970s, but Korea was a backward country then. It was kind of
yeah.
weird to think it's so popular now and there's BTS, there's Korean food, and there's
Yeah.
Parasite and all this stuff. But it was just yesterday, it seems it was everyone was living in poverty in the villages and the economy was crap. It's just amazing to watch.
It is. It's so yeah, because in the book, we meet Young. She's 11, but Japan has been occupying it for 20 years. 20 years, I think, at that point. You said.
Years by that point. No,
Yeah.
1910, so 18 years. So she grew up only knowing a country being
Yeah.
occupied. And many people grew up during that era. And it's hard to lose your homeland to another power.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. I could only imagine because I'm like, well, I'm fortunate. I'm born, raised in the U.S. and I love traveling, but it's just I get, and the more I learn, the more I'm like, oh man, I am so fucking lucky.
I
Like, it's
know.
just,
No,
it's
I know.
crazy.
And I think
Yeah,
writing this book, it was eye-opening in that, wow, the people went through so much and were worried about our problems. And yes,
yeah,
they're valid. There's something called intergenerational trauma. It's not like we're suffering in the sense of having something to eat, making sure that there's something to eat, but we carry the trauma of past generations. I truly believe that. And I think that part of the healing that my grandmother did, hopefully a little bit, by telling her story and by me writing this book, is to shine a light on these human stories that would have died otherwise because these voices weren't in demand, weren't important.
yeah,
But
sure.
I think they are. I think everyone's story is important. So
100%. Yeah, because I like how you in this story, like because once just what something you were discussing reminded me of in the story where she did start school in Japan and that begun like that kicked off her having to make those decisions and what part of herself is she gonna go with? Like what is she gonna try to fake it or is she gonna hold strong to her Korean roots?
right,
Or is she just gonna change her name and try to fit in and try to be passing? And
right.
it's tricky and it's so and just to have to face that as a young person and like thinking, okay, I don't want to be bullied and I don't want to be singled out. But then like in order if she does do that, then she finds out that she risks the camaraderie, the tight-knit camaraderie that she did have in kids students similar to her own situation,
Yeah,
but then they become, like, almost they ostracize her because she's making that clear-cut choice,
right.
and "I'm trying to fit in," and they're like, "Okay, then you're not one of us anymore," and it's just she can't win. I just
And
like
that's called conflict, right? And that's
yeah, yeah,
the best juice for a story in some ways.
yeah,
But one of my blurbers, I loved what she said because she said, Myung, who lost herself and then found herself again. Yeah. And I think how wonderful a gift it is if we could all go through all this stuff, identity crises that we have in life. Whether for me, it was coming to the States, and then it was like career versus motherhood. It was like the identity things that we go through over time. I lost my train of thought,
it's okay.
but I think it's just we do lose ourselves and we have to just remember, wait a minute, find ourselves again. What does that mean? And who do I want to be? And what kind of who am I as an individual, and to embrace that
Yeah,
and to not hide or deny a part of yourself, to be that full and whole person, and messy and smart and silly and
yeah.
all of those things.
Especially since she's up against not just, like, Japan versus Korea, but then also those 2 identities, but also traditional roles for women versus she's not a son, and then eventually there's a lot of pressure for her to deliver a
Yeah,
son, to give him a son, and
yeah,
it's where she wanted to be she wanted to be educated. She wanted to go to school. That's what she wanted, and she wanted to be a teacher,
yeah,
and she was thriving, and she was happiest doing that, and then her path kinda pivots, but then she finds, like, a new purpose, and she finds, like, new pride in that,
yeah.
and so I just thought but again, it's definitely both teaching and medical treatment, nursing that's so important, but at the same times, I'm thinking, like, okay, they wouldn't those were her
Yeah, those
because
were the only
yeah.
options, and even in her own law family, which was very difficult, obviously, there were certain prescribed traditional roles that were you could embroider or you could make kimchi and you could sell it at the market, and even if she tried to do those things, they ostracized her too because here she is, she's like out there, or I guess at that point she was like deciding what to do and they didn't want her in their circle. She was a single mom now, and so she really had no choice. But it's interesting, the agency part, because as I was developing this and I went through developmental edits with my publishing company, and I had amazing editors, and they really wanted me to focus on her career more, like just her goals, like she wanted
Mhm.
to do this because we're all driven by something. We have an obsession, and we don't know what that is or what that's going to look like, but as long as the characters striving, that's what makes the story move forward. And it's
Yeah.
just like a craft thing that I learned as I was writing, that you don't write about just this happened and then that happened, as she wanted something and then she didn't get it. And
Yeah.
that's what makes us as readers care
Yeah.
about the character.
Yeah, it adds more depth to her character, and slowly you're getting to know her more through those decisions, through her like work like in her head. Having a way to explain her thought process or like her rationalization and making those tough decisions, and
Yeah.
it's just more of a way for the readers can like to get to know her as a person.
Right. Yeah. That's what I was hoping to do. And I think that's what my editors were
Yeah. Yeah.
hoping. But
Yeah, they're trying to find a nice way to put it. Yeah, we need to know more about her.
what
Yeah.
motivates her, right? What
Mhm.
motivates her, and so
I wanna kinda touch on, because she gets a lot of you touched on it a little earlier, whereas she finds comfort and support in religion.
mhm, mm,
Like, her teacher introduced her to it, and then she found it was, like, a safe space for her, and then she found a community
yeah,
that supported
yeah,
her just like a sense of belonging, but also, like, with what she wanted to do with her life.
right.
And I thought that was yeah, I thought that was really interesting, expand on that, because I imagine I think it's pretty common in a lot of different cultures, but I found it so interesting that as a child, she found it, and then and it continued no matter what she was going through, she continued to seek out that community, to seek out that comfort.
Yeah, I think it was really the only thing she could ever count on in her life to be there. And even yeah, I'm writing a sequel, by the way, and so you'll see how the thread continues through her life. But the real
Nice.
life person that she was an elder at her church at 95, and
Okay.
she gave scholarships to students from her church who couldn't go to college otherwise from her Social
Mm,
Security income. She did eventually immigrate to the States, and she came when after she was 60. Like, it would be me moving to, I don't know, Mexico, not
ye
speaking a word of Spanish and having to start my life over now, but she had done that a few
wow.
times. And then she gained she studied for the citizenship exam. She became an American citizen right before she passed away. It's just like
Mm.
it's truly tremendous, like, the experiences of childhood and the
Oh, yeah.
courage to be somebody new or to do something different is formed, and as long as it's embraced and not ignored or suppressed, and
Oh, yeah, because she's probably, "Okay, I've done it before, I'll do it again." Like, what? Because
I
I think about that too, of people who emigrate to other countries, like, not just the US, but as you see, for example, in your book, throughout history, throughout a sort of anything going on, people have many different usually have different reasons for having to do that, to travel to a place where they don't know anybody, they don't speak the language, they don't have any sort of job or income lined up. They might have some relatives
right,
who,
'cause
but still, I'm like, that is, like, it's so crazy to me.
yeah,
It's so crazy that so many
yeah,
millions of people have done it over the course of, like, American history or even other countries' history too.
yeah.
It's so what? Because I don't know if I could ever do it. Like, I probably could if I had to
If you had
be
to,
if I
too.
had to.
I'm
Yeah,
sure you could.
but it's just God, I can't imagine, like, I would just be s it would I would be so nervous and scared, and I don't know where people just get the confidence to do that and to just, okay, well, I guess because they have no choice sometimes,
Yeah, yeah,
and they figure it out.
yeah. I'm actually in Washington, DC right now. My home is in
Mm.
Los Angeles, but, I had the opportunity to go to the National Archives today.
Oh,
I was
nice.
such a nerd and spent, like, 3 hours in there, but
Yeah.
there was a whole exhibit on the Magna Carta and the pursuit of liberty and freedom that America stands for throughout time, and obviously failed miserably during slavery in
Mm,
recent times, but just that search that America represents the country where there's that hope.
yeah.
And so I think people still where I'm still very proud to be an American despite all of our problems, and I think part of it is the journey that my family took to be here and the sacrifices that they made. But we can't forget where we came from. That
Yeah.
was in the thing. The past is the prologue. The past is truth or something like that. It was
Yeah.
yeah.
It is important because yeah, it's you can love your country, but you could still acknowledge that we did some bad
We did
things.
some
Like,
things.
we were involved in things that we had no business being involved in. We
Exactly.
did some things like, why do you think we're the richest country in the world? It's because we were built for free.
Right.
Like, it
Off the
was
backs of slaves and
yeah, like, people
immigrants.
like, I was talking to an episode that I was just finished editing that's gonna go out tomorrow, was with Chantel Madison and talking about her book, The Fallen Fruit, which is, like, about a time travel a Black American family is they have a family their family curses that they fall through time, they don't know when it's gonna happen, they just know that after a certain age, they're safe, and that if my sibling falls back, then I'm safe. Like, it's only one person from each, like, unit and per generation, and,
Interesting.
like
Interesting.
and s yeah, and it really was, and so it was, like it was crazy to think of, like, she was also inspired by her family history. She found, like, records
Uh-huh.
of, like, I think her so many greats ago, great grandma had bought once she was free, she was able to buy a plot of
Mhm.
land, and she was, like, a landowner next to people, like, essentially who didn't want wasn't weren't cool with that, but I thought it was fascinating how she came up with that, and she like, the fact that so many, Black Americans, there's no record of them because they were seen as property, not as people. So that's, like, what that reminds me
Yeah,
of. It's
yeah,
and that we're not even keeping track of, or at least it's just not made widely known
yeah,
because of the way that people were treated back then and
yeah,
just the way that the process was,
right,
and
right.
it's still taking so long to get a hold of that, like, for people to, like, anybody who says that this country isn't racist, I'm like, I don't wanna say that you're dumb, but I feel like
Yeah,
you're looking
look
at
around.
things with either rose-colored glasses or, like, ignorance is bliss because it's I don't know, I feel like we could fall down a rabbit hole, but there's, like, certain types of racism, it's if, like, you're an asshole, you're an asshole, but if you're just trying to I'm not gonna equate, like, your personality traits to, like, your skin color. I don't think that's definitely not something that and maybe because I'm fortunate, I'm half Mexican,
Mhm.
and I don't look like it at all, like, my dad's Irish, so
Okay.
it's funny because you look at my mom and I live like the white version of her, so it's funny. But, like, some stories like this kind of remind me of fighting with those identities and discovering parts about your family and how that affects, like, where you are today and how your family history or what your family went through
Yeah,
in this country or in that country, like, affects, like, my maternal they were living in Texas since before it was Texas.
right.
That sale happened, it's generations back, that sale happened, and now they weren't Mexican, they were American,
Yes.
like, the border crossed them.
Yeah.
That's crazy to
I
me, and then it's a couple decades ago, I just remember, like, my grandmother when she was in Chicago, single mom raising 3 kids, she was like, "No, we're American, we speaking English."
Oh, that's
Like, I speaking
exactly what
Yep,
happened. Yeah,
yep.
yeah,
Yeah, and it's a shame because 'cause I'm like, I could have been like, I know I'm just not confident in my Spanish, like, I know because like, family members I grew up speaking it, I learned it in school, but it's if you don't use it, you lose
yeah.
it. So, I just, like so, yeah, and I totally sympathize with that because my uncle, he would get some of the points, like, reminded me of, like, my uncle would get it would encounter violence from classmates or neighborhood kids if he spoke Spanish or if he spoke English, like, he got beat up both
Either way.
which so it just reminds me it's like it was survival, but it was, like, still, that's what certain parts of your family history kind of remind that of me in the story that you, offer
Yeah.
to readers was that it's just such it's like such a it's a huge part of it because it's just like, what do you do?
Well, I think the scary thing is that it's still going on, and that's one of the wanted to highlight is that one of the other surprises in my research is that I went to Japan just this past year. I've been several times, but I have Korean Japanese relatives who still live in Japan, third generation, and they speak fluent Japanese. They don't know anything about Korea, or they
Mm,
do, but they don't live there anymore.
yeah.
Japan is their home. They can't they're still discriminated against in jobs. My cousin was
Oh,
a
wow.
job at a clothing manufacturing company, and they said, "Oh, even if she had changed her name, if they find out that she's Korean, they won't." She said that they didn't allow her to have this job. They wouldn't
Oh,
hire her,
wow.
and then she had to prove herself at another job, and then finally they hired her. So the standards were much harder for
Yeah,
and sometimes downright denial just because
yeah.
based on your race. And even if it's hard to tell, unless she passed as pretended and became a Japanese citizen and renounced her Korean name, only then would she be wholeheartedly accepted. Um,
That's crazy because that's, like, happening in present
It's
day.
happening,
It's
and
like
it's still possible because Asians look like Asians. You can't tell. You could pass as white or Hispanic or whatever, right? If you had to, maybe. I couldn't pass as a white person, probably, unless I wore my brown
it's
wig.
something, I don't know, yeah.
I don't know. So it's just an interesting identity is really interesting to me, and it's something that I wanted to
Mhm.
explore more, but I just hope that we're all comfortable in who we are, and
Yeah.
we could embrace all the different parts of ourselves because that's what makes us unique individuals.
Yeah, and it's so wild to me how, like, collectively, there's so many humans going through similar experiences because of those they're like that inner conflict because of those
Mhm.
experiences, whether or not they're from this area or they're from, like, across the world, like, it's still they can relate to one another, and they don't even know it. Like, they can, like, someone's
Right,
experience
everybody
in
right, but
Yeah,
nobody talks about it because it's shame. I think
yeah,
it's the shame. because you're told at home like to be a certain way, and then out in public you're told to be a certain way, and your
Mhm.
peers are telling. There's just so much external pressure, and I think, yeah, self-care and understanding who you are and where you came from, and I think knowledge and acceptance and awareness, like those all are really good things to strive for.
Yeah, no, it's 100%. Like, I feel like everyone, it doesn't matter how old you are.
Yeah.
I would say people who are older could probably like benefit from, you're not too old to learn something. Older people can benefit from learning, from seeking out knowledge or information, and because I guess I'm more always on the line of I'm not sure if I know enough to have a legitimate opinion. If an opinion I have about certain thing, I'm always like hesitant to speak it because I'm like, well, there's probably something I don't know or I haven't considered. So I'm just gonna observe and see what other people are saying. Or yeah, because it's just I guess I just try to my best to be open minded or balanced. And
Yeah.
there's certain issues that I'm sorry, it's black and white for me. But
Yeah.
on mostly, I'm like, you know what, I don't know enough about that to really feel confident about contributing to the conversation.
Right. Or you can
Yeah.
always just say, "I think,"
Mhm.
or "This is my personal opinion," or
Or
"But
from
I
what I
don't
know,
know. This
yeah.
is what I'm." Yeah, it is hard. I think part of it is we're women. I
Mm,
truly believe that some of my friends are very vocal. They're vocal women, they're
mm.
vocal men. They're just it's our personalities.
I think you're
It's
absolutely
a
right.
combination of a lot of different things. It's not just about knowledge. It's about speaking
Mhm.
up, and do you want to speak up? And for me, the word has always been a safe place, like the written word. I think you doing a podcast is brave because you're just like winging it. You
Yeah.
can't revise. I guess you can edit this, but I think for me, the word has always been safe because I could express myself and really think about what I wanna say.
Mhm,
But I
and you can go
go
back
back
and
and think
edit
about it
and
again, but I
yeah.
think there's power to speaking spontaneously and
Mhm.
authentically, and these podcasts are amazing just because, you elicit the truth. You sort
Yeah.
and s
I know, and I say I try not to get too political, but so many books are like commentary and they parallels to what one family or one person is going through,
Yeah,
and based on their environment or the circumstances of their situation, and a lot of that is like because of the powers that be or because of inequality or because of like racism and sexism and
mhm,
misogyny and so many of those things. It's just for those reasons it's reflected like in a lot of, even if you want to go not even historical fiction, you could get into like contemporary or even fantasy books. Like you can go get in there and be like, okay, there's some themes here. If
yeah,
you could identify it, and
absolutely, yeah,
it's just yeah, absolutely. It's crazy if you dig deep enough. It's there.
yeah.
It's
It
there.
doesn't
And
matter
you're gonna
the
have an opinion.
genre, really. It's all about telling a story, and we're all wired for story, and
Yeah.
that's why you're doing what you do, and I'm doing what I'm doing because we love learning about, I think, other cultures, other ways of
Hmm.
thinking, open-minded, and that's the reason I wrote this book really is to educate, expand cultural understanding, and to encourage uh, other people to realize that they might not be alone in some of the things that they feel about themselves or others.
Yeah, absolutely. Me, this reader got that. I feel more familiar, more educated. I that's why I appreciate opportunities to learn from perspectives other than my own, just like, especially culturally, because I'm like I had no idea these were some of the like horrible or unfortunate circumstances that people across the world had to endure for
Yeah,
years. Now I'm like, yeah, like I was joking before, fiction. It's like it's still historical, and these are real life events, and these are real people's stories that it's just like how you're delivering it.
right,
And I
right.
yeah, I enjoyed it a lot.
Oh,
And because a lot of the people that she would meet were from, they were under similar circumstances, but they were like from different parts of Korea, for example. Like
right,
they were,
right.
and they had like different for example, like with her in-laws,
Mhm,
just noticing that shift
mhm,
and
mhm.
during that. We'll try to be, like, spoiler free, but yeah, just when things certain things happen, like, you just see that shift, and then it's, what she has to try to figure out, and then she has no choice, and she's, like, making tough decisions, and she's got her son to think about, and she's, "What am I gonna do?" So just a couple more
Yeah.
questions before we hop off here. I do wanna throw this at you because 'cause I'm curious. What was the most challenging part to write? What was the most interesting part to or the enjoyable part to write?
I guess the challenging part was just in the most simple terms is like dialogue. Was I'm not a native Korean speaker.
Sure.
Imagining this was all happening mostly in Korean, sometimes in Japanese. What would they naturally have said?
Yeah, yeah.
The language itself is full of restraint, right? So they wouldn't be talking like, "Hey, how was your day?" Like they
Right.
wouldn't be. It would, and I really had to think about. What the conversation would look like. And so I think that was a little bit challenging. And what was the other part? The most interesting,
Almost
the most
enjoyable.
enjoyable? I think when the most enjoyable was just deepening, like there was a romance, the romance scene of them like at the river, and she had knitted him a sweater and she gave it to him as a gift. And just those writing those tender moments, like I was just like, "Oh, I liked writing that. Maybe I'll write romance next." Yeah.
Mm, yeah, yeah. You could make a historical romance if
Historical
you like to
romance.
go down that road, yeah.
Yeah, just I enjoyed that more than I thought I would. And
It was cute. It was like it's always cute. I think there's a reason why romance sells, like, we eat that shit up.
yeah,
It's just like it just gives you that, like, fuzzy feeling, and it's just you like seeing people something go right for them.
right, right. I did have editors or readers early on saying, "I just want something good to happen. Can we rest in this chapter and something good happens before the bad thing happens?"
Yeah.
So I did have to modulate a little bit too, but at the end, I couldn't help it. I just had to keep going. It was like day of suspense, but
I could get no, I could totally see that. Yeah, I was like, yeah, I'll say if you I'm happy to learn that we're gonna get more of her journey. But
yes.
yeah, if you have other ideas, I would say historical romance is certainly a
Oh,
thing.
yeah,
And I
yeah,
would think that would be super fun for you
it
probably
would be
too.
fun. Yeah,
Yeah.
I have a 2-book contract, so my second one is due next year, and I don't know how I'm gonna do it because it took me 10 years to write this one.
Oh no.
So and I have a few months to write the next one after my
Yeah.
now I know how to do it. It's still hard. Every book is hard, but I feel I have a little bit more confidence that I could tell a basic story, and I can always deepen it as I go. That
Mm,
it's not that I'm going to have editors helping, and that's the beauty of publishing in a lot of ways. If you find the right publisher, is that sensitivity I had a cultural sensitivity reader, I had Korean language reader, Japanese language reader, copy editor, proofreader. There was a lot of support, and
yeah.
I think they're hoping that this is going to do well, and I hope so. I hope not to disappoint, but this was so fun. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, no, I think so. I think once you get a feel for it and then yeah, like you said, you're more confident with it now, you're more familiar.
yeah.
By the second go around, you take what you learned and you push through. And so hopefully the time frame that you have isn't enough to scare you too much, but
With deadlines, I think that's part of being my lawyer
mm,
background is that I
mm.
operated on deadlines, and I think I'll give them something. It doesn't have to be perfect, right?
Sure, yeah. Yeah, you're just like, "I got this, but wait, tell me if I'm still on track,
Yeah,
'cause"
yeah,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah.
So what advice do you have for Mi Young, if I'm pronouncing that?
Miyang, yeah,
Because she goes back and
I
forth
know.
between those
It's
names. Yeah,
Miyoko and Miyang. Yeah, you said it.
okay.
What advice do I have for her as a character?
Mm,
Oh, I know what it is. At least for this going forward, right? Yeah, because
mhm.
I know what's happening in the second book already, and I'm already
There you go.
advice is your memories are not the same as your child's memories. So as they move forward in the next book and through their life, she's going to have a memory of this time, his childhood, that's very different from his memory because for him, he's home. That was his
Yeah.
home, and now he's being taken away from his home. She might have had a negative experience there leaving, but his memory is not gonna be that way, and to, sympathize and have empathy for those feelings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's such a good point. That's so interesting. It just makes me think of some of the authors I've spoken to who either them themselves or like their parents had to raise American children when they're not American themselves, or like authors, they're raising American children when they're not from there. And it's so different. It's so there's like that divide, there's that disconnect. And I think, yeah, it's just so interesting. It can add for so many, like, deep moments, juicy moments, like, figuring out how to navigate that dynamic and that relationship, and, yeah, there's good stuff there, there's a lot of potential there, that's
There
exciting.
is. I'm excited, and I'm gonna be writing in a boy's voice as well.
Okay, okay.
So, I'm excited about that. It's a fresh voice.
Yeah, that'll be really interesting. I'll have to, yeah, I would say, yeah, when and if you're ready, I'd love to have you come back because I'd love to pick your brain on and see how that went for you, how you
I
managed to
would
do
love
that.
that, Megan. I've really enjoyed myself, and when I was going through your old podcast, I came across your interviews with Namrata
Mm.
and her name came up recently because I'm gonna be doing part of my book tour in Boston, and I'm gonna ask her if she might be my conversation partner.
Oh, yeah, that would be so, yeah, that'd be so fun. I've talked to her 3 times
Yeah,
now. It's easy conversation
yeah,
between us, and it's fun to tell her, I'm like, "You know what? I think I like this one out of your 3 female protagonists. I think the one with the word vomit coming out of her mouth all the time." Like, it's cool to pick her brain and see how she evolves as a writer, and I bet same for you, it would be, like, super cool to see because it for you as a debut author and then how you're gonna take that going forward.
right. Yeah, no, I would love to
Yeah.
stay in touch. This has been
Yeah.
fun, and
Absolutely, absolutely. Rosa Kwon Easton, White Mulberry, that comes out on December 1st. Thank you so much. As I would recommend this to people who like historical fiction, who like maybe want to have similar experiences in their family history that they can relate to. It'll resonate with those readers. And yeah, like I said, we'll keep in touch and be happy to have you come back, all that good stuff.
thank you, Megan. I really appreciate it. It's just been fun.
And there you go. That was Rosa Kwon Easton talking about her newly released book, White Mulberry. That book is available now. Check out the show notes where you can find links to see the book reviews and where you can find Rosa's website and online and on social media. Also, links where you could purchase the book. While you're browsing online, please find Cantina Book Club. Follow, subscribe, rate, review. It really helps me out. Find me on YouTube. If you need a book recommendation, check me out at cantinabookclub.com. I'm always posting reviews. If you're finding books that you like, something that will really help the authors out, besides pre orders and ordering their book in general, is to really go on Amazon and Goodreads and rate and review those books that you like, because it really does help the authors out for their current works and anything they want to do in the future. And as always, thank you guys so much for listening.